So I think it's safe to say that regardless of where you are in the UK or the world, you're probably pissed off with the government. For those of you blissfully unaware, you lucky, lucky bastards, Alexander Boris de Fefel Johnson, also known as that posh twat running the country, is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Previously, he was the Mayor of London, Conservative MP for Henley in Oxfordshire, journalist and Bullingdon Club cunt. Unfortunately for everyone, he has also published several books, including his comedy thriller, 72 Virgins, approximately the same amount of children that Boris has sired and subsequently estranged. Wikipedia sums it up in 3 lines. The President of the United States plans to visit the Palace of Westminster. A Lebanese-born terrorist aims to assassinate him. Roger Barlow, a hapless, bicycle-riding, tousle-haired MP, aims to foil the attack in order to distract from a scandal involving his financial entanglement in a lingerie shop named Eulalie. Hapless, bicycle-riding, tousle-haired MP. I don't ever want to hear another man complain about self-insert Mary Sue's ever again. Ever. I can already tell that Boris isn't going to make my favourite author, and that's fine. Not everyone can be critically acclaimed writer and creator of the Harry Potter series, Tara Gillespie. But I know this is going to be 300 plus pages of self-aggrandising wank, so... Part 1, Chapter 1. Oh, there's parts and chapters. Interesting. The Trojan Ambulance. Okay, so bearing in mind this is the first page. On what he had every reason to believe would be the last day of his undistinguished political career, Roger Barlow awoke in a state of sexual excitement and with a gun to his head. The one fading as he became aware of the other. So we start out being unfortunately aware of our protagonist's libido, and it gets worse, with him then describing his 4-year-old son as having an exuberant and uninhibited Oedipus complex, and recalls an incident in which the child tells his mother he's going to kill daddy and marry you. Why? Why was that anything anyone needed to know? What does that add to the story? Was that an attempt at humour? Okay, that was disturbing. Moving on. I mean, Boris is from the same political party and educational background as our previous Prime Minister, who fucked the dead corpse of a pig, so maybe this sort of thing is genuinely hilarious to someone in their circle, but still. We now get a description of our protagonist, Roger. Pyjamas, an old Tory campaign shirt, and Boris finds it necessary to tell us that Roger's wife finds it very unsexy. We're like 1 page in, and 3 times, in the presence of a child character, the narration has brought in sex to some degree. Knowing this comes from the mind of Boris Johnson somehow makes it worse. So Roger goes on to have a wee panic about the papers, and we're treated to what Boris thinks of the media. Flammed up old cobblers masquerading as news. Neither the fact that Boris used to be a journalist nor his political position surprises me. It sounds like a very superfluous way of saying fake news. Albeit this is 2004, but still. Boris is clearly up to something scandalous because he feels the need to check the papers or something before throwing them out. I wonder if the scandal has something to do with going outside with very little clothing on, because the next thing we know, Boris stretches his t-shirt down over his hips and goes outside to throw papers away. I do hope he was wearing something on his bottom half, judging by the paranoid way he hopes no one sees him, and again tugs his shirt down over his hips and realises someone has seen him. I'm assuming not. Boxer shorts usually cover that sort of thing, but he's either removed them or forgotten about them. So far we know that Roger, thinks about sex a lot, has a weird kid he doesn't really like, and has probably done something scandalous and walks through the front door, dick out, much to the behest of his neighbours. All in all, a engaging and relatable protagonist. Roger is then locked out of the house by his kid and then embarks on a quest to find a thing in a thing. What? Okay. he blusters on for a bit, and it turns out it's a file about a respite centre that they, whoever they are planning on closing. Information that could have been given to us without all the bluster, but sure. Frankly, at this point, and again, we are not very far into the book, this is within the first few pages, all I can say is that Boris is a master of telling, not showing, which is the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do with writing. I understand that exposition is needed on occasion, but there are ways to do it without waffling and then backtracking. Boris then shows us how much he cares about his constituents by informing us that he reviewed their pleas for help while drinking. Great. And now we go to the President of the United States and his wife, marvelling over Weetabix. Do you not have Weetabix in the US? They're acting like they've never seen it before. This doesn't really serve any purpose other than to introduce the president and his wife to the audience. We're on the second chapter now, and we're now introduced to... Oh god, I'm so sorry if I fuck this up. William Eric Kinloch Onyama, who ponders adjectives and London in general, and then he gives someone a parking ticket. Okay. Apparently this fellow is royalty. We have an actual Nigerian prince in this story. A Nigerian prince who is a traffic warden. Okay, we can roll with this. He really likes handing out parking tickets. I mean, good for him. I guess it's good to enjoy your job. Now there's a group of guys in a cafe who have just been given a ticket by this guy, and they're apparently Arab. Oh boy, I wonder what role they play in the book. So it's revealed in chapter 3 that the police are looking for this ambulance, and Boris is back to panicking about newspapers and how to stop his wife from reading one. The police panic about Arabs, one of whom is called Jones, which triggers the Americans because he's on a wanted list. William Eric, the royal parking officer, is arguing with aforementioned Jones, and he's saying that he has to come to the pound? Roger realises that security will be tight on this particular day, doesn't have his phone on him because he threw it out of a car window and is spoken down to by a policeman. There's a Serbian bloke who is somewhat racist, and Roger witnesses an assault and has this to say about it. A classic scene of our modern, vibrant, multicultural society. A group of asylum seekers in dispute with a Nigerian traffic warden. Poor bleeders, he thought. What were they? Albanians? Kosovars? Tajiks? Uzbeks? Martians? Now their day was wrecked. They would have to find the thick end of 200 quid just to spring their motor. How many windscreens would they had to wash to earn that back? I don't even know where to begin with that. That's a lot to unpack right there. Okay. After thoroughly wanking himself off, Boris decides to go and stick his nose in, and in the midst of a load of unnecessary waffle, is told to piss off and die. So Boris/Roger does just that. I mean, he pisses off. Unfortunately for the audience, he does not die. I wish he would. The story might be a bit more interesting. So Jones and his gang possibly kill the traffic warden, and that's that. What, they just... Chapter 7, the Serbian bloke from earlier obsesses over the Yugoslav conflict in a way that someone who is not from the Balkan region would imagine. Again, I don't know what adds to this story. I'm so unengaged that I can't keep track of all these characters, and frankly, there's too many of them for such a short story. This isn't a series-long epic. It's not a saga. This isn't the works of Tolkien or George R.R. Martin. This is a, 300-page book written by some poncy prick that thinks a rudimentary grasp of the English language qualifies him to write a novel. Chapter 8 was basically more somewhat racist waffle, but Chapter 9 provides a little bit of insight into Roger Barlow as a character, and says a fair bit about Boris in the process. See, as Boris worries himself silly over his impending doom, he greets a colleague who we learn is nicknamed Ziggy, and is basically another Boris. So far, Ziggy is the only character that Boris has interacted with, including his wife and child, who Boris seems to talk to and about with any level of respect. Roger is then, yet again, impeded by security. this time by an American officer who informs him he can't be let through without a pass, and our shining hero proceeds to have what amounts to a temper tantrum. I can't let you through without a pink pass with the letter P. Barlow had grown up in the Cold War, and when at school he had read Thucydides? I don't know what that says. It had been obvious to him that America was the modern Athens. Energetic, pluralistic, guarantor of democracy and freedom, therefore infinitely to be preferred to the Soviet Union. Closed, nasty, materialistic, that says militaristic, the modern Sparta. But now, on being intercepted by an enormous Kansan, just feet away from the statue of Winston Churchill, he felt his gorge rise. His eyes prickled with irritation. I am a member of Parliament. What? I'm not really sure what Boris is trying to say here, other than, I had a fancy education and I know big words. It really does seem like this little literary outburst was a way to remind everyone that he is educated and he, a British member of Parliament, is being unfairly hindered by a nasty communist? Is he comparing this American security officer to the Soviet Union for doing his job, which is security? Anywho, we carry on back to the Americans, and the president's wife is worried or something, and there isn't really much to this section but filler. However, a strange description did catch my eye. It was an insane way to travel, but kind of fun. The Cavalcade? I don't know, I can't read. Mounted the ramparted expressway at the end of the M4, and West London was spread out beneath them in the morning sun, like a beautiful woman surprised in bed without her makeup. What? What does that mean, Boris? Tell me what that means, sir. Sir? Hello? Anyway, they have an American sniper on the roof for protection or something, and the police decided that this sniper needs someone British there to rein him in, which, fair. So the police sent Indira Natu, who Boris describes as follows. She had huge eyes, rosy lips, and tiny, delicate hands, in which she now toted an Arctic warfare sniper rifle. Bearing in mind we don't really know what anyone else in this scene looks like, other than Lieutenant Jason Pickle, whose description is literally sizable. But we needed to know about Indira's strangely infantilizing features that were relevant to the plot, and why is Indira described like one of those tiny anime girls that wield big fuck-off weapons, while Jason is just sizable? Jason Pickle's name has come up multiple times throughout this story, and all we know is that he's sizable. Why was Indira's huge eyes, rosy lips, and tiny delicate hands actually put there? So we get some minor character insight. We know that Jason Pickle was in Iraq and occasionally gets flashbacks from his PTSD. Indira, being a delicate and emotional woman, tries to get him to open up about his war trauma while they're on a job guarding the president, and Jason is all ready to make this firearms officer his new therapist, and then all of a sudden, Big Ben has the audacity to bong. Bong. It's now chapter 11, 8:45 AM, and we aren't even a quarter of the way through this crock of shit. It's taken us 11 chapters to introduce characters. That's all it's been, introducing characters. It's like Cats, if Cats had been written in prose format by a racist trying to comment on multiculturalism, and then switching between different groups of characters, and I don't care about any of these characters, not a single one. No progress has been made with the plot, nothing has actually happened. A group of would-be terrorists have stolen an ambulance and had it clamped, a traffic warden likes his job too much, Americans are concerned about safety, and the police do their jobs. All throughout this, our heroic protagonist, Boris Johnson's wank sock self-insert, has been flailing around like a useless dying fish about to be used in some unspeakable hazing ritual by the Bullingdon Club. This book would have been literally half the fucking length if Boris had just stuck to the bloody point. You can tell this was written by a politician because he's writing and he's speaking, but he's saying fuck all. And nothing happens in this chapter either. Boris, yet again, is denied entry because he forgot his pass and gets pissed off at the American who won't let him in, so he throws a wee straw until a British policeman lends him his mobile phone, probably just so they won't have to deal with him anymore. So Boris rings a mate to let him in. Deadass, I did not think I'd be sympathetic to the police or the US military ever, but they seem to be the only people in this book with an iota of sense. Chapter 12, and the president gets a two-fingered salute from some school kids in hoodies, and his wife makes an assumption that those guys would rather Saddam was still in power, despite them being like 11, and 11-year-olds are edgelords. Then we go back to Jason, who reflects on his time in Iraq, and we're just going to skip over this because 1, it's not really relevant to the plot, and 2, the Iraq War was never about freedom or democracy. It was about oil and weapons and profit for the rich at the expense of Iraqi civilian lives and Western soldiers being used as cannon fodder. Chapter 13 has the Serbian bloke running around trying to find the police when he is cornered and oppressed by, you guessed it, some Muslim asylum seekers who just inexplicably know he's a Serb. Roger/Boris gets his assistant to come down, and we're treated to a description of her. She looked like a character in a Hairspray ad, with glossy evangelical skin and lustrous eyes. Again, I'm not sure why we're being told this, and I don't know what that means. Glossy evangelical skin? Especially given we don't know what Roger really looks like, but in my eyes it's just Boris Johnson. We're also creepily informed that he keeps an eye on her romantic career, bearing in mind that his assistant, who is American for some reason, Cameron McLean her name is, she's 24 and Roger is 52. Boris is already creeping on women young enough to be his daughter. I wonder if the fantasy version of himself has a string of abandoned children too. Interesting. Roger finally gets the paperwork needed to allow him access to his workplace, and we're treated to some more juicy information about Cameron. We're reading this from Cameron's perspective now, and oh boy, I wonder what this says about how Boris views his female colleagues. Roger was indebted. England was indebted to Cameron's former political science tutor. This was a languid Nausicaan with whom she had been in love, and who had baffled her, candidly, by his refusal to sleep with her. At the end of her last winter term, she had come to see him in his study. The snow was falling outside. "What should I do, Franklin?" she had asked him, stretching her long legs out on his zebra screen rug. "Where shall I go?" Boris, my guy. Why did you... Is this how you see your female colleagues? As sexy models desperate for some older man cock? I'm moving on from this. Okay. So Cameron isn't really a huge fan of Boris, and I can't say I blame her. She goes on to say that she doesn't appreciate how little he cares for his constituents and how much disregard he treats his role as an elected official, which is fair, but she then outs herself as a neoconservative who hates France and writes, and I quote, "An answer to a letter from a constituent who sought the joys of matrimony with his same-sex partner," in quotation marks. She wrote a rather fierce letter, if not exactly consigning the man, an IT consultant, to the licking tongues of hellfire, then at least making it pretty clear what she, or Roger Barlow, whose name and superscription appeared on the letter, thought of the whole project. It becomes pretty clear that her disdain for Roger/Boris isn't because he doesn't look after his constituents well enough, but because he isn't right-wing enough for her. When she confronts him on this, Boris writes that her lips grew tight and her eyes larger and more beautiful than ever. I don't like anyone in this book. Not a single character is likeable. Sometimes, it occurred to her, when she listened to Roger waffling about pornography or abortion, the mullahs had a point. No wonder the Christian churches seemed to be in permanent confusion and decline. No wonder Islam was the fastest growing religion in this country. Fucking Christ. You can picture what kind of girl she is. She's one of those blonde-haired, blue-eyed, gun-toting kind of American girls who think there's something fresh and new for being a woman who is conservative and they're being oppressed for being proud and outspoken dicks to people. Fucking hell, no wonder Boris has her in the wank bank. After some more scathing descriptions of people exercising their right to protest, it's revealed that dear Cameron has been somewhat less than ethical, as her boyfriend has asked her for a favour. He wants her to smuggle in some journalists from Al-Khadija. Based on Boris's overall beliefs and the subject matter of this book, I can probably guess where this is going. She didn't have to do anything difficult, he said. She just had to pick them up. And obviously he couldn't do it himself because he didn't have a researcher's pass. And by the way, could she get one for him too? So Cameron is a hot, smart, seductive career woman who knows how to do Roger's job better than he does, and somehow also really fucking stupid. Okay, so chapter 15, and every bong of Big Ben gives us an insight into what a load of different people are doing. And none of it is interesting. None of it. Absolutely none of it. So immediately after all of this, we see another example of Roger sucking ass at his job, and smart, attractive lady has to tell him what he's doing. This doesn't even feel like a joke at this point. I feel like this genuinely happens. Oh, Cameron, by the way, I have a terrible feeling I have to make a speech in the debate in the afternoon. That's right, Roger. The whips have been on to us already. They are expecting it. Oh, Lord, sighed the MP, stopping. Can you remember what it's all about? And Cameron voices everybody's opinion here and says, why the hell couldn't he ever concentrate on what he was saying? I sent you a speech. I sent you a draft of the speech. It was in your mail on Friday. Oh, yes, and what's the bill about? It's the water utilities bill for England and Wales. The whips thought you might be interested in speaking on fluoridation. Said Roger. And what line am I taking? Well, I sort of presumed you would be taking a libertarian line. A lot of people have been writing in saying how much they dislike fluoridation. They say it's the nanny state. Nasty stuff, is it, fluoride? Well, it can be deadly poisonous. They've done a lot of research on possible side effects. Don't tell me, said Roger. I know what it does. It causes premature balding in rhesus monkeys, hypertension in rats, and it changes the sex of cuttlefish. If you say so, Roger. Is Boris self-aware here? Is he roasting himself on how much of a floundering, flaccid cock he is as a politician? Like, there's no way he can't know. Cameron has a legitimate point about Roger's principles. He has none. He admits he knows absolutely nothing about the realities of life outside of his own experience and refuses to learn, and that, above all else, is what makes him such an ineffective leader. Roger then proceeds to tell her to open her mouth so he can inspect her teeth, and when he asks her if that's okay, after she's already done it, he starts rambling about displaced negatives. Now, this is what we call Barlow's law of the displaced negative. In principle, you are saying you are happy for me to look at your teeth, but there is a stray negative, the no, which simply needs to be removed from the beginning of that sentence and inserted between subject and predicate to give the real meaning. You secretly mean it's not fine. To give another example, men are often asked, do I look okay in this dress? And they answer, no, you look great. The displaced negative is a clue to their real thoughts. They should say, yes, darling, you look great. The female equivalent is, no, darling, you have masses of hair. Why was that there? Why did I have to read that? Why? What the hell? We get it. You went to private school. Do you want a fucking badge? What? Why? What? Why was that? Moving on. Okay. Chapter 16 gives us another character profile of Cameron's probably dodgy boyfriend Adam, who might be a part of this terror plot, and then chapter 17 is set back in the ambulance, and Boris seems to really lay into the Muslim stereotypes. Like, we know they're Muslim, we know they're Arab. Just in case we forgot at any point, we needed it reinforced with things like calling the sat-nav an American computer whore, a guy called Habib with prayer beads, a guy called Haroon fantasizing about violence, the heathen dog, a mutual love of animal cruelty. And this description, with his slanty eyes and triangular tongue, Haroon was like a priggish wolf. If that porky tow van operator hadn't beaten it so quickly, Haroon would have done it for him, with all the dispatch of a halal butcher slicing the throat of a sacrificial kid. Back on the subject of the slutty sat-nav, because no one just thought to turn it off, Haroon said something truly awful to the computer about what he would do to her mother's ribcage. Then he struck her on the fascia with the seatbelt cutter. The machine started to squeak and gibber, like Robert De Niro's Islamophobia when he is hit repeatedly on the head at the end of Cape Fear, because we're all just supposed to know what that means. I've never seen Cape Fear. I have zero context for that reference. So this next part reads as very flat, very stereotypical, and not at all like a real conversation that would take place. I'm not going to comment on references to the Quran and Islam here because I actually don't know that much about it, and that's really not my place. If there's any Muslim listeners or watchers, feel free to chime in and comment or make your own video on this book, because I'd actually be super interested to know how it makes you guys feel. I'm really only here to roast the Prime Minister and add some literary commentary here and there. So one of the ambulance gang members just suggests that they call it a day because so many things have gone wrong, and he's got a feeling this point is just kind of keep going. So the leader, I think, gives him a little pep talk and amps him up for the murder as follows. Remember what it says in the Holy Quran, my young friend. Slay the unbelievers wherever you can find them, arrest them, besiege them, and lie in ambush for them everywhere. Yeah, said Dean miserably. Right, we will perform the jihad against the kuffar, the unbelievers. Yeah. Remember that Allah is our ally and they have no ally. We are the lions, Dean. We are the lions ready to set out. We will assault with speed, with the heart of a volcano, with the bombardment of thunders. The ambulance moved across Whitehall to the right. Dean felt his mood lift. Think of the her. I don't know how to pronounce that right, I'm sorry. The black-eyed virgins of paradise, Dean. Would you like 72 black-eyed virgins? Whose chastity has been violated neither by man nor jinn? Would you like that, Dean? The ambulance slowed as it approached a red and white boom that controlled access to their intended car park. Habib smiled, and so did Haroon. Yeah, said Dean. He guessed he would like that, really. Other than the kind of creepy concept of virginity in the first place, and like I said, I don't have an extensive knowledge of Islam enough to comment on this interaction, but more than anything else, so far this really does read as somebody who only knows the most basic Western view of Muslim beliefs and doesn't really know how Muslims talk to each other, and certainly doesn't know how members of a terrorist organisation talk to one another while in the process of committing acts of terrorism. It absolutely reads like Boris's speech patterns here and how he thinks all conversations happen. Now, this isn't always a bad thing for the writer's voice to come through in their work. Often it can be a very good thing, because what is writing if not a way to get your voice into the world? However, this only really should work from the point of a narration, not when you're writing characters that represent the opposite of your message. Reading this, Boris's lack of understanding of the world outside of his own experience is so obvious, because you can barely picture any of the characters that aren't Roger or Roger's allies. None of the characters really have their own voices or personalities. It really just reads like every character is just Boris in a different wig. The lack of diversity in character speech, thought process and perspective is, if not just the bad plot and the fact that it's Boris Johnson writing it, is what makes the writing so flat and two-dimensional. So we go on to Dean's backstory, and Dean, being the bloke that had his doubts about the impending attack, his mother cheated on his father, or her husband, or whoever, with a black guy, and then gave him up for adoption, where he was taken in by a white couple that he had a happy, if occasionally awkward, childhood. We have a lot of exposition about his adoptive parents' feud with a neighbour, and we find out that Dean's adoptive father calls him a racial slur in a moment of rage. Unsurprisingly, Boris writes this man very sympathetically, while also implying that it's impossible for adoptive parents to love their children as much as their own. And this is why Dean is now in a stolen ambulance with other dudes trying to kill the President of the United States in the name of Islam. Okay? So chapter 18. Cameron's dodgy boyfriend is letting the ambulance boys in, and he gives his exposition on why he's helping them and why he lied to Cameron about them being a media group. And chapter 19 chapter 19, opens with this quote. Now the noise was rising from the square to mark the imminent presidential arrival, and the crowd was flagellating itself with posters denouncing everything American, from bombs to powdered baby milk, like distraught mullahs at an... Again, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this. At an Ayatollah's funeral. Again, I'm not really sure what that means. Which, again, Boris really drives home his limited perspective of the world. If you dislike the government and the American leadership, you must be a Muslim. And if you're a Muslim, you must agree with terrorism. Obviously. He has a very black and white way of looking at the world. He never actually addresses any legitimate concerns of the protesters, just dismisses them as anti-American and pinkos and what have, and it's very much reminiscent of a staunch Republican on Facebook, commenting on something he doesn't really know about and just needs to let everyone know that being a conservative and not being a liberal is his entire personality. Boris winds up talking to a journalist he doesn't really like and asking him for a discreet look at the news list, and is absolutely not at all suspicious about it. He also addresses him as old boy. Posh people of the audience, do you actually address one another as old boy? Because every time I read it, it makes me cringe. I can't imagine someone from a time period later than circa 1930 using it unironically in conversation. Cameron complains about Englishmen, which, considering she seems to have been going on dates with upper-class pricks, I can't say I blame her. I've been on some unfortunate dates in my time of men of that crop, and believe me, it is not worth it. At least Boris is self-aware about how cringy and weird they are. But not self-aware enough, it seems, because Boris then writes, from the perspective of Cameron, at one point she seriously considered the rights and wrongs of an affair with Roger. Once you get over the nicotine-stained teeth and the goofy sense of humour, there was something vaguely compelling about him. The gaunt face, the brown eyes that seemed perpetually amused, the beer drinker's thatch. She'd briefly taken to walking into his office and staring at him for no particular reason, but he hadn't seemed to notice, and she had just given up. Yeah, Boris gives us a pretty clear idea of what he thinks of women, i.e. colleagues and wives, and they are there to be given or denied the peen. I hate everything about this. We're a quarter of the way through and I want to kill myself. I'm gonna skip over the next bits because basically nothing happens except Boris complains about protesters even more. We're back to Cameron again, and we find ourselves even more painfully aware that this woman is the creation of a man who has little to no idea about how women work. To say that her feelings had changed would do scant justice to the endocrinal choir of happiness within. According to a reductionist account, probably from the pages of Marie Claire, it was all about phenylethamine, which was, in turn, stimulating the production of norepinephrine and adrenaline, suppressing her appetite for food and filling her with a sense of excitement. Her hypothalamus was producing serotonin, giving her a broad benignity, and out of the substantia nigra of her brain came the really good thing, the boy from the black stuff. The most powerful and addictive of all the drugs in her personal self-generated pharmacopoeia. It was the dopamine that gave her the sense of invulnerability, the hormone that lets a boxer take his punches and helps a rugby player get knocked down and get up again. It was the dopamine, the clinching intoxicant of sexual love, which now propelled her through the concourse of Portcullis House, proving glances pinging off her from all sides. Without that drug, it is doubtful she would have gone, as she did now, to the pass office. You literally could have just said she was happy and excited. I had to reread this several times to understand everything, not because I'm an idiot who doesn't know big words, but because I just needed to be sure I wasn't having a stroke. The clinical way in which Boris writes Cameron experiencing emotion is so weird and so alien. He sounds like an android trying to process a human feeling. The way in which he writes this almost sounds as if he sees Cameron, a fictional woman, but his fantasy ideal woman nonetheless, as if she's an entirely separate species. He can't just say she was jovial or ecstatic or enthusiastic. That would be too human. He has to describe the chemical reactions in her body in a medical way in order to separate her from her own sentience, as if she's a creature to be observed because, like, who knows why women feel the way they do about anything? Better explained scientifically. That and this whole paragraph just screams, look at me! Look at me! I know big words! Look at me, I'm so smart and I know how human emotions are biologically processed and I'm such a fucking intellectual and blah 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 blah. This is definitely a contender for Worst Writing Award. Shove over Morrissey. Nothing much else happens except Boris complains about youths and poor people and how it's entirely their own fault if they fall into crime and whatnot because there's so many resources out there and troubled kids are just complainers and lazy and provide some bullshit evidence which reads less like the passage of a novel and more like an opinion piece written by an upper-class conservative journalist who doesn't really understand how the rest of the world wait. We then go on to Dean's backstory on how he became a Muslim and how he fell into conspiracy theories that his imam spouted, and really it is just a load of Islamophobic stereotypes. Ironically, the conspiracy theories that Boris lists as being touted by radical Muslims are the very same conspiracy theories touted by evangelical Christians and far-right pricks, for example. It is planned to have the first homosexual prime minister. They wish to clone human beings. They wish to legalise child prostitution. Marriage with animals will become legalised. All women will be allowed to beat men with rods like in American jails. There will be microchipping of the entire population. GM crops will be introduced. Sound familiar? It should. And then again we get walls of filler with characters we don't know or care about, and the only interesting thing I noticed was Boris comparing Labour's proposed hunting ban to Saddam Hussein's dictatorship and Nazi Germany, because apparently both of those states banned hunting with dogs. Interesting. Okay, I know I keep coming back to the character of Cameron, but every time I think Boris has reached peak awful when writing women, he manages to surpass himself. It's almost impressive. He's actually going for the Freudian daddy issues angle now. Deadass, listen to this. Obviously, she needed an alpha male. She needed an authority figure to supplant her father, but she had concluded, with the prosaic exactitude of a feature in Honey or Bella, that she needed someone who was both the same as and opposite to her father. She needed an alpha/gamma male, and Professor Adam Swallow surely fitted the bill. And further down, as if to emphasize the Freudian of his point, the phrase he simply had the right stuff exploding hormonally from every orifice. Cis men, are your hormones exploding from every orifice? Exploding hormonally from every orifice. What does that mean? What does that mean, Boris? Exploding hormonally from every... Exploding hormonally from every orifice. Cameron's dad is exploding hormonally from... Get on Cameron's dad's level, lads. Come on. Liberal men could never. It's God's everlasting joke that he blessed me with the gift of sight and the gift of understanding so that I may comprehend what is in front of me, and yet I am faced with Boris Johnson's 2004 novel 72 Virgins that contains the phrase exploding hormonally from every orifice and somehow manages to get worse before I am even halfway through this book that was surely forsaken by the Lord. Did God look upon Boris trying to write this and thought, oh yeah, this will be hilarious, because that's the only explanation I can come up with this. Unless God has abandoned us completely. Who knows at this point? Who knows? More walls of nothingness happen until Boris/Roger is informed about Cameron obtaining press passes for the dodgy media group her alpha male boyfriend is letting in, and Boris/Roger becomes suspicious because he didn't authorise this, showing the audience that he can, in fact, rub those two brain cells together to create enough friction to birth a thought. Suppose we should give him a round of applause for that. We then go back to Dean and talk a bit more about his exposition, and Boris feels the need to disparage higher education and the Welsh language. Quote, under the Learning and Skills Council, it had been turned into a teacher training centre, where Welsh was dinned into the skulls of graduates, with a view to passing on this weird Crayol to listless children of Denbighshire. Because apparently we just weren't being rude and offensive to enough people, apparently. More to the point, does Boris know what Crayol is? Because Welsh isn't it. Let's look at the definition of Crayol. A Crayol language, or simply Crayol, is a stable natural language that develops from the simplifying and mixing of different languages into a new one within a fairly brief period of time. Often a pidgin evolved into a full-fledged language. Welsh is definitely not this by any stretch of the imagination. He then goes on to describe the push to get more people into higher education as Stalinist, which, sure, let's go with that. And finally, we reach chapter 26, where maybe, potentially, some action may be happening. Roger/Boris has acted on his thought from early on and gone to check out who Cameron issued the press passes to, and he thinks, it's that ambulance. Weird. And just as we think, great, the story can progress. He's going to tell someone about the ambulance. Problem solved. No, we're hit with more extensive backgrounds on the two other members of the ambulance squad and why they joined a terrorist organisation. And at this point, I am just begging for some way to separate out all the backstories because they are so long and so poorly placed. I actually cannot stand to read this book for an excessively long time. The pacing is fucking awful. The structure is awful. There are so many characters with little to no attempt to make them relatable or even likeable. We, the readers, are forced to learn everything about these characters all at once without any real progress on their individual stories. Every time a character so much as breathes, we are treated to this long, complex tale of who they are and why they are the way they are. Boris patronises and spoon-feeds his audience exposition and analysis that we could very easily do ourselves on the way, and these giant side notes are so badly done and take up such a huge chunk of the narrative that it's so easy to lose sight of what's actually happening in the story. I have to keep going back and retracing my steps because I forgot what was happening before I was taken on this wild journey into the past of these random characters who I'm probably going to forget about in the next page or so. Oh my god. I think that's all we have time for now. If you hated this as much as I do, feel free to stick around for a part 2 where I will inevitably lose all sense of reality and be forced to seclude myself in the forests of Bohemia like all good artists. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.